Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laos. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's dive into today's episode. Yay! Well, we have my friend Kendel on here today, folks, and I'm so excited because she's so fun and also just has a heart of gold. So, Kendel, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us about who you are.
Thank you, Karen, so much. I am Kendel Paulson. I am a career and life coach, and I've been so for the last 5 years. And I am on a mission to empower women to find their strength, get what they want, and live the life that they deserve. So
Woo!
that's why I'm, do what I do. I come from I'll give you a quick summary for everybody so that they know who they're talking to is. So I come from a military background. My father was in the military, so I lived around the globe. But from that experience as a child, I became about service. So how can I serve my community? How can I serve my family? How can I serve others and help them live the best life possible? So, and that is how I ended up in this profession of coaching. So, and I guess the best thing, I'm based in Washington, D.C. and love it here and hate it all at the same time. So, yeah. So, and it was just, you and I met, just to let listeners know how you and I met. So I was putting on oh my gosh, during the pandemic, another coach and I got together and we decided, hey, we should go and put on a platform. I forget even what it was called at this point. And we had put out a solicitation for speakers. And I had found you through the speaking community. You reached out to me and the rest is history. I was so blown away. I remember listening to you talk about communication and how to communicate and effectively communicate and how we need to find our voice in that communication. And I was like, I need to get to know her because not only is she brilliant and could help me find my own voice, she's really a lot of fun. And that's what we're supposed to be doing in life is having fun while we do all this. So,
Oh, thank you. Well, I feel the same way about you for sure.
oh, thanks.
Yeah. Well, I want to dive into, let's start with where we said, because usually I love to start with a little bit about your confidence journey, but then of
Mhm.
course we go all over the place here. But I love the most recent thing that you shared about what discovery you had when you were reading my book. Do you want to jump into
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm about to give another talk on Monday to a group of women. And I was struggling to figure out what do I want to say? What is it that I could say that's different than the last time so that I could continue the message of of empowerment? How can I help them feel the confident in the ability to ask for what they want? And I couldn't think of anything, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, I should probably read Karen's book." Since she wrote it, I should probably do that. And I had it's been sitting on my bed. And so I was like, "Well, I can't figure this out. Let me distract myself. Maybe I'll think of something." And then I started to read. And just FYI, I kept reading and I couldn't put it down because it was filled with so many phenomenal tools and techniques that I was like, "Oh, this is great." And the way that you tell the story is so enjoyable. It's personal, but it's like you turn the next page to find out, okay, what happened next? It's almost like an adventure in how to communicate. And I was reading through it and all of a sudden it came to me, and I can't remember exactly what was the statement in the book, but at some point I realized, oh my God, I had just had an experience with a friend of mine who was really struggling. And I was like, that's it. She's struggling because she doesn't have her voice. She's not
Hmm.
asking for what she wants and she's not communicating it in an effective way. I know what I'm going to talk about. And your book was the precipice for making that happen. And I realized at that moment that unless we are able to communicate, we will never get what we need or want. And the reason why is because no one can read our minds. So we have to have the courage and confidence to speak up with confidence, speak it clearly, you don't need to be hazy, ask for it.
Hmm.
And what comes back is what they're able to give you. But unless you ask, no one's going to know.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you see yourself in that story?
Oh, well, that's so easy. I was that story when I know that you and I have talked several times about my wanting to speak, to be a speaker, to help empower and motivate women. And so I've reached out to you several times, and I have learned while I was reading your book and kind of reflecting on my own journey that it was communication with intent.
Mm,
I wasn't very clear on what I wanted to share, how I wanted to share, the ability to get the message so it was heard. And I think that is where a lot of us fail.
mm,
We are so busy trying to figure out the perfect thing to say that we end up saying nothing at all,
mhm,
or we miss what we're so busy trying to say the best thing and sound smartest that we end up not saying anything because we can't figure out what's the smartest thing to say. And we end up just sitting there waiting and wondering, when is this going to happen for me?
mm. Oh, it's so true. Well,
Yeah.
and that's what I found myself for so long doing. I mean, everything that you're saying is so relatable
Mm,
because and I think a lot of times we're in this world, we think that we're the only ones. And then you start talking to more people. I mean, it wasn't until the pandemic hit and I launched my own business that I realized, oh my gosh, there are so many 40 something, 50 something women in corporate positions or in entrepreneurial businesses that still hesitate.
mhm.
And you put it so beautifully because it's this whole dynamic of, oh, I better not say, oh no, I can't say that. Oh, that isn't going to be good. And all of this happens. And then suddenly the moment's passed.
Yeah. No, and it's so funny. Like, you open your book with that story of, I loved it because it was so been there, done it, where you were giving a presentation and you're struggling and stumbling and you can't get it. You're trying to deliver a message and it's just not, and the reason why is because you didn't believe it.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about the first time I ever spoke, and I was like, stumbling and umming and eyeing, and it couldn't retain the information in my head. And I was like, well, because it wasn't, I wasn't believing myself. Number one, I wasn't believing in myself to believe the fact that I got to say those words and present it to these women. And if we don't believe in what we're saying, we don't believe in ourselves and we don't believe in what we're saying, we're not going to get that message across,
Mhm.
because it has to come from a place of integrity and honesty. And from there, you build the confidence and courage to say it out loud.
Yeah,
And if,
absolutely.
and if it doesn't match your integrity, if it's not matching what you believe to be true, it doesn't matter how hard you practice, it's just not going to come across as believable.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
it's so true. Where would you say that you have built the most confidence?
Uh, this is so you told me one time, imagine that you're sitting, I think it was sitting over coffee or sitting on the couch talking with somebody, and that's how you need to get your message across.
Hmm.
It's not about being the loudest or the most forceful or the most passionate, because a lot of people shut down when that happens. But when you're sitting there and you're having a conversation, I think that was the word you use, have a conversation,
Yes.
you'll be more impactful because you're inviting people into the conversation instead of telling them, you're engaging with them. And that was so important for me to understand, because I think for a lot of us, we feel like, I have to get up there. I have to get it out there. I have to say it really fast. I got to make my point, and then I'm going to go sit down. And then, and what happens is everybody's kind of like still stuck at hello. No one heard the rest of it. You're not having a conversation. You're not inviting them in to that discussion. You're just plowing right over because you're just like, I got to get it now. I got to get it now. And it just doesn't happen that way. So
Yeah.
that for me is the biggest confidence building piece for myself when I go and talk to groups. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, and let's face it, that's how we connect with people. That's why people are more responsive to someone who's conversational. And in fact, at my old job, I used to, well, I don't want to give this away, but it doesn't really matter. But another company, I've seen other people do this too,
Yeah.
but where we get up and read something that actually has 3 key points, legitimate content that's interesting, but looking down, hesitating in the voice, lots of ums and ahs, and then ripping it apart and saying, that's not how I want to be, it's funny because I've done that enough where in advance people are chatting with me just like this, like a lot of people in life, they're being their conversational selves, but then
Yeah.
they get up on the stage and they suddenly get into that presenter mode. Like,
Yeah.
now we're going to talk about the fundamentals of communication.
And 95% of the audience has fallen asleep. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And
I
then
think
you go, wait, that's not working. Yeah. Go ahead.
no. And I was going to say it was really funny. The most successful talk I've had so far is where we actually ran. I was so embarrassed because I was like, oh my God, we ran way over time. And I apologize, at the conclusion of it, and after everyone had gone, I apologized to the coordinator, and she said, "Oh my God, are you kidding? They loved it. That was the best that they have heard yet because you had them engaged and you had them part of it, and you not only did you inspire, but you gave them something to walk away with, and that was so profound for them." And I was like, pat on the back kind of thing. So I was like,
Yes,
okay, yeah. So, yeah.
absolutely. Well, and that actually begs the question, what would you say you're best at with how you serve the world?
What am I best at? How I serve the world? Oh, that's a
Yeah,
good question. I think, oh, not to toot my own horn,
please.
but let's go ahead. What I think I'm bet to serve the is my passion that I want you to have the best life possible. I
Mm,
want you to achieve what is right for you. It was really funny. I was talking to my daughter today and I said, when you grew up in the military, especially back in my day and pre, modern time of military engagement, it was very male dominated. And I didn't have any brothers. It was all girls in my family, which of course is opposite of you, right? You're like
mm.
the pack of, yeah,
Yes.
brothers. But I grew up with no brothers. And in a community where men pretty much dictated how everything was going to go because they were the commanders of the ships and they were the commanders of the teams and they were commanders of this. And we were, in a sense, beholden to whatever their career was going to be. Women had not entered the military in any capacity until the 80s or late 70s, early 80s. And as a young girl growing up, all I saw was my father in his leadership roles.
Mm.
And so what happens is you want more. I used to struggle and fight with my dad all the time because I'd be like, but women should be able to do X, and he'd be like, no, women should be Y, and I'm like, and so I was constantly in this conflict.
Mm.
It is growing out of that and into my own self and having the confidence to say I have a right for a voice was a huge and very terrifying leap for me because of the fact that I didn't have a role model that broke the barrier. So I needed to kind of test the waters and check myself and go out there and risk. And I got hit a lot of times. I had, people tell me I wasn't competent enough, I wasn't good enough, you just stay in your lane kind of thing.
Mm.
But the essence of being empowered and having the life that you deserve is about taking the risk and having confidence that you have that right, that we have the right as women to live the life that we desire our lives to be, to do the work that we desire to do, no matter what anybody else tells you.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Oh, I love that. Well, what advice would you give to someone who's trying to figure things out? Just thinking about how you would help that woman who's struggling.
it's so important that you don't believe that you do it on your own, that you go and find I call them your success team. Who do you want in your circle that's going to be there to support you, to cheer you on, to make this happen? We shouldn't be thinking that we have to go alone in all of this, and that we're the only ones having this fight or this battle or this struggle. There are so many of us out there that want to see each other succeed. Go find who's going to be in your tribe, as they say, and feel good about asking for those people to be in your tribe instead of
Mhm.
believing, no, I have to do this on my own. Nobody is successful out there on their own, not even Beyonce. She has a whole tribe.
Yes, yes, that is true. Well, I'm thinking about when you're in your past, or maybe it was recent, but
Mhm.
where would you say that you have made a mistake that you learned from, and what you could impart, what wisdom you can impart on us from that?
Let's see, just one? That's gonna be a challenge, just one mistake. The idea that I think I go back to, I don't wanna harp on it, but the idea that I had to do it all on my own,
Mm,
you know, my father used to say, and understand, I love my father, and he was a phenomenal human being, but he would say, "If you want a job done right, you have to do it yourself."
mhm.
And what I that translated for me is that you have to rely on yourself and yourself alone and no one else to get you to where you want to be. And I think that is cheating us of the opportunity to grow, create community, support each other so that we are multiple successful. And we end up not if we don't think that we need help, in the end, we're going to need help because we will burn ourselves out. And we're going
Beautiful.
to be
Yes.
just depleted so that we can't have the life that we really want because we're so tired of trying to carry the whole backpack by ourselves. Spread the wealth,
Mhm.
team up, find your tribe, find your support system, those that are there to cheer you on to make sure that it happens. That is my lesson learned along the way.
Well, and how do you get there? What is one step that you'd recommend?
Good question. That's why you're so good at this. You ask good questions. That is, you have to start, let's go back to the beginning. You have to start using your voice. You
Mhm.
have to start spreading the message of I am finding your community of what you want to do and seeking out, asking for what you want, telling people this is what I'm interested in, start talking about it. It was really funny. Ran into I had been in this cohort working with military spouses, and I consider myself a retired military spouse. My husband was in the military and then retired. So I was in there with this young wife, and she and I actually ran into each other. It's been like 5 years. And God love her that she's young enough to remember me because I was like, I know you, but what's your name? Anyway, hopefully she won't hear this. So, point being, she, we came together and we talked about the fact that she started, I apologize. So she came to me and we talked about how things had been. That was it. And we were sharing our stories about where our businesses were at this time. And what was so interesting is that she reached out to me and said, well, how are things going? How can I help? And so I talked with her about that. And then and I said, well, how can I help you? What's going on in your life? And something not related to her profession, it was something personal. And I said, hey, call me. We're all here for each other. So the first thing that we had to do was just start the conversation. Tell
Beautiful.
people what's going on and what you want and what you need. So yeah.
Well, and that's the struggle, is how hard that is, right? That requires us to be vulnerable.
Mhm.
It requires us to admit that we need other people. And I'd say that a lot of people, including myself, had similar messages from childhood. You
Yeah.
want to want something done right, you're going to have to do it yourself. And then every time somebody disappoints us, we go back to that. Well, that's right. You want something done right. And yet, I have also experienced incredible value out of the people that are in my tribe, and you are
Mhm.
one of those people.
Thank you.
And this feeling of just comfort and support that you get just simply by asking.
Mhm.
And then the question that I would have for you, that I would love your input on, is how do you get to where you feel like, I'm thinking about the woman who is still trying to hold it all together herself. How do you help her, even just like in this conversation?
Mhm.
What suggestion would you have for her to ask for what she needs?
It is if you're really the question that you really have to ask yourself is what are you afraid of?
Oh,
What are you really afraid of? If
mm,
you're not asking, what's
mhm.
holding you back from that? And once we identify, that's the thing that we have to remember. And I won't go way into this, but because I love talking about fear. And I do. I would talk about it all day, why you're wired that way, how your brain is. But essentially, we are pre-wired to keep us where we're at. Our brains are actually wired to keep us in the cycle of whatever existence we're in because it doesn't like change. So when we start to think about changing, our fear factor goes up and we have to kind of identify what is it that we're really afraid of. And once we do that, then our brains will quiet down and we can start moving forward.
Oh, that's
So whenever we start to feel that anxiety or, oh, I can't do that, or that sounds really great, but I'm afraid, or it doesn't, that's not going to happen to me. It is, what are you afraid will happen if
hmm.
you ask for what you want? And
Hmm.
then you have to write it down, by the way, because if you
Okay.
write it down, yeah, that's really critical. If you write it down, it allows your brain to process through that fear to make sure how true is it? Or is it just something that you've been using as an excuse where you can move on beyond it? So how real is it?
Hmm.
But that's where you start. If you're holding it all together and you're like, what am I'm really tired, or I want to move forward, but I can't. The question you have to ask yourself, what are you afraid of? And then you're going to start to be able to move forward.
Hmm. That's really good. Ah. So, would you be willing to share one of your fears that you've overcome by going through the same process that you're suggesting for others?
Sure. So my biggest fear um is so one of the things I've had to learn to do and ask for is the opportunity to speak in front of groups. So talking about what I do and the fact that I speak to women and women's groups and speak about empowerment and overcoming fear and how to create the plan of action to move forward. I was just not doing it for the longest time. And someone finally told me, they're like, well, how is anybody going to know if you don't call them? And I was like, you want me to do what? You want me to call them? And she's like, yeah, you kind of need to let people know what you're doing. They just don't come. Like, I thought if you built it, they come. That's what the movie did. That's what the Field of Dreams
Right.
did.
Right.
I don't understand why it's not happening. She's like, you have to be willing to put yourself out there and be rejected 100 times to get the one that's going to say yes.
Oh, 100. That's a
Yeah,
lot.
it is. But you've got to start somewhere. You have to start somewhere. So they won't call you back, or they'll say, we're not interested, or you'll just, you have to be willing to be rejected so that you can be accepted. And so,
That's
yeah.
powerful. Say that again.
You have to be willing to be rejected to be accepted. Because what's going to happen, my biggest fear of the rejection of someone saying we're not interested, no thank you, and hearing that again and again and again, how do you keep moving forward? And what happens, it's like the game of golf. I don't know if anybody's played golf. You hate golf until you make that really good swing, and you could have 100 horrible swings, and then you make that great swing and that ball just soars and it's beautiful, and you're like, oh, I can do this. And then you go and do it again. You keep, but the point is, it's like, it's all about you just got to keep putting yourself out there. My fear was putting myself out there continuously, taking
Yeah.
that risk of having bad shots or risking being, we're not interested. And then having to pick the phone up again and do it again. And eventually what happens is you get a yes. And then the yes is that great shot or that hole in one. And you're like, this is awesome. And so it allows you to have the energy to go back and go try again and again and again until that next great swing or shot and the yes. And then you move on.
That's a great analogy. Such a good analogy. So we have to all go over that one, or hope for that one moment. And it's really any sport when you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah,
of
I mean,
these.
yeah, you're absolutely right. It's anything. It's not even it's anything that we try.
That's true.
It's right. I always tell everybody when I start coaching, and they're struggling, I said, listen, if, I know that you're trying to make change. Change is fearful. This is why it's fearful. I want you to remember this. Everything in life is like riding a bicycle. We start out, we're scared. We look at it. It's, we're going to start trying. We're going to fall. We're going to skin our knees. We're going to get up and we're going to get back on. We're going to keep trying. We're going to fall. We're going to skin our, we're going to keep doing that. And then before we know it, all of a sudden we're moving forward. We're not falling down. And before time, we don't even remember the falling down because we're doing tricks. We're going to get so comfortable about this new way of operating, this new way of being, that is just going to be part of ourselves. Just like when we were kids and we would be riding down, doing wheelies on our bicycle. Oh yeah.
Another great analogy.
Thank you.
Well, what haven't I asked you yet, Kendel, that you'd like me to ask?
What haven't you? I don't know. You always ask such great questions. I can't think of anything that I haven't wanted to talk about. I think that, let me do it this way. Karen,
Uh-oh.
if you were coaching me on finding my voice, I've come to you as a new client and I've said, I don't know what you mean. How would you help me?
That makes me emotional, because I think about what comes to mind is that moment where you're sitting in that meeting and your gut tells you, I want to say something, but you don't. And you know that feeling so well because it's happened many times. And my invitation to yourself would be, the next time that happens, that you speak whatever it is that you're thinking, that you share the idea, and just start by opening your mouth and saying something as a first step. And then it'll get easier and easier. It'll probably be messy at first. You might speak tentatively or hesitantly, but you at least said something. And then the more you do it, the easier it will be. And really, when I think about my goal, it's about women being free from all those like those entrapments, in a sense, of the self-doubt and the judgment and the I have to be perfect and all of that. So that would be my thought.
I love it. That's just so, yeah. It is about finding that within us that says it doesn't matter what anybody else is saying. It doesn't matter what anybody else is perceiving. If we don't speak, we're not going to, if we don't speak, we don't have to worry about it. If we do speak, who cares if what they're thinking? It's about us as a human being to have the power to speak. We have that right as a human being to have our voices heard. And if we do
Yes.
it in a way that is open to conversation instead of judgment, instead of aggression, instead of dominance, it allows the conversation to happen. It allows, you're inviting the whole table in, and it creates the community of which I think we all desire.
Amen. Wow. Preach, preach. Yes, it's so true.
Well, I had this
Okay.
really great teacher. So
Tell us how we can reach you.
well, you can reach me through my email is Kendel, Kendel, at purposedrivenlc.com. My business is Purpose Driven Life Coach. And you can find me at www.kendelpaulson.com.
Awesome. Well, it's always a pleasure to hang out with you, Kendel. So thanks for being here.
Well, it's always like our conversations are a treasure, and I always walk away with something. And thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you.
Of course. And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laos. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laos. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.